Welcome everyone to this hybrid event on promoting budget credibility through external audits, a handbook by and for Supreme Audit Institutions. This event is jointly organized by the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government, DPIDG, of the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, and the International Budget Partnership. My name is Claire Schouten, and I'm delighted to be moderating this event today. I would like to invite all participants in the audience to actively engage in the discussion by sharing questions and comments and experiences for those online through the chat, or you can engage with us on social media as well at hashtag INTOSAI 2022, as well as hashtag open budgets. We also will invite you to contribute through an interactive tool that we'll be using in this session to identify areas of interest to you. So welcome. We are very pleased to convene today with diverse stakeholders on this important topic. Supreme Audit Institutions have an important role to play in strengthening the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Checking and reporting on the legality and accuracy of public accounts, as well as the credibility of budgets, can be instrumental in governments delivering on their sustainable development promises. The importance of budget credibility is recognized in SDG Indicator 16.6.1 and is relevant across all the Sustainable Development Goals. Lack of credibility of the planning and budgeting system as a whole can compromise the delivery of critical services necessary for attainment of the SDGs, and more broadly inhibit the transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. SAIs, the International Budget Partnership, and UNDESA have been collaborating to develop a handbook on and for SAI's contribution to strengthening budget credibility through external audit. The handbook has been developed in collaboration with a group of SAIs, resource experts from Argentina, Brazil, Georgia, Indonesia, Morocco, the Philippines, Uganda, and Zambia, as well as a reference group of experts from diverse countries and institutions. Now, the SAI experts have been working together in 4 work streams, which focus respectively on recurrent audits of state budget execution, audits of the performance of the entire public financial management system or its components, ad hoc audits of credibility risks across the budget cycle, and monitoring and follow-up up to budget recommendations related to budget credibility. So today we'll hear from the contributors of the handbook. They'll share key messages of the handbook and audit practices related to budget credibility. And the discussion will highlight some of the lessons learned of these experiences and practices related to credibility, as well as opportunities to adopt and use the handbook and further institutionalize and promote budget credibility assessments through external audits in the INTOSAI community. So thank you again. Without further ado, I'll be introducing our speakers. I'll introduce them as we open their remarks. So first I'll turn to Aranzazu Montero, Senior Governance and Public Administration Officer at the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government at UNDESA, who'll give an overview of the handbook. Arantxa, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. It's an honor to join all of you, those in the room and also those connecting remotely, to share some reflections on our collaboration with International Budget Partnership and with Supreme Audit Institutions on the topic of budget credibility, and to present the work that we have been doing together on the handbook on how Supreme Audit Institutions can promote budget credibility through external audits. I would like to thank the Federal Court of Accounts of Brazil for the opportunity of organizing this side event in the margins of the 24 INTOSAI. So, as Claire mentioned, the importance of budget credibility has been recognized in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through a dedicated indicator in the global framework of indicators, indicator 16.6.1. Checking and reporting on the legality and the accuracy of public accounts and the credibility of budgets is actually critical for delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. And recent research conducted by IBP, by the International Budget Partnership, and published this year, shows the impact that significant budget deviations may have on making progress on achieving the SDGs in different sector areas. And as you can see in the slide, there are in different countries a sample of 12 countries, and we see that there are significant underspending in certain SDG sectors, and that have also an impact in terms of the results and making progress on those SDGs. There are, of course, multiple reasons why governments may deviate during budget execution from their planned budgets. And of course, there is a critical, as we have lived during the past 3 years, include emergencies and external shocks. However, a persistent inability to execute the budget as planned also reflects poor public financial management practices which can affect the integrity of public funds. And more importantly, also as we highlighted in the opening, budget deviations have an impact on the delivery of goods and services, and also affect the achievement of long-term national plans and objectives such as sustainable development goals. There are significant cross-country variations in terms of the deviation of aggregate expenditures from the approved budget. And according to data from the International Monetary Fund for the period 2005-2020, for a sample of 152 countries, 34% of those countries show significant budget deviations between 10 to 15%, and 39% of those countries show large budget deviations over 15% of the approved budget. There are different factors that explain these budget deviations, including external shocks, as I mentioned, but also public financial management processes and systems, and the wider governance and institutional system in each country. Strengthening budget credibility is really about improving and strengthening the governance of the budget and making sure that governments deliver goods and services to citizens. And these are two key ingredients for strengthening trust in public institutions. Supreme Audit Institutions have a critical role in that regard in providing in-country analysis and information to identify and understand why budget deviations happen, the extent of these budget deviations, but also how public financial management processes, how they work in practice, may affect the credibility of government budgets. Why have we worked and embarked in this project, in this journey with Supreme Audit Institutions? We started this handbook in 2021, working with a group of Supreme Audit Institutions represented today here. And we found that in the public financial management literature, there is really a gap in terms of how Supreme Audit Institutions contribute to understanding and assessing budget credibility. However, we also found that auditors are looking at these issues, are examining issues related to budget credibility and to factors that may create risks to budget credibility. In this sense, the handbook aims to raise the awareness of auditors regarding the concept and the notion of budget credibility and how audits can inform the evaluation and the assessment of budget credibility issues. We hope that it will be a useful reference material for Supreme Audit Institutions, for auditors, for other stakeholders, and also an analytical and capacity building tool for Supreme Audit Institutions that aim to promote and to strengthen their work and their evaluation capacities on budget credibility. We would also like to promote this work within the wider INTOSAI community and the role of Supreme Audit Institutions in budget oversight and budget credibility within the INTOSAI community, but also to engage in a dialogue with other actors and other stakeholders working on these issues. I would like to give you an overview of the handbook before our resource experts go into more detail in terms of what is in the chapters. So you can see the table of contents, the structure of the handbook in the slide there. The first two chapters really introduce the concept of budget credibility in the context of the public financial management system and identify different dimensions that are relevant when auditing budget credibility. The chapters also include some relevant international standards related to budget credibility and assessment methodologies and tools that can be useful for auditors in their work. The two initial chapters also consider how supreme audit institutions could determine whether and how they would audit and start doing more audits around budget credibility. And one key message in this regard is that the selection of budget credibility as an audit topic relates to the strategic planning processes within the supreme audit institutions, and the relevance and the significance of budget credibility challenges and risks within the national context also play a role in selecting this kind of topic. The chapters really provide or build on different experiences and examples from supreme audit institutions. They present some tools that may be useful for auditors, but also examples and good practices from different countries and from different regions. In chapter 3, we actually go into the knowledge of business for auditors, and it focuses on how to identify and assess risks related to budget credibility at the whole of government level. The next three chapters, chapter 4, 5, and 6, really provide a menu of options of different alternatives for auditors, for supreme audit institutions, in terms of how to conduct this type of work. In chapter 4, we present examples from auditing the performance of the public financial system and also other assessment tools that supreme audit institutions may use in combination with audit methodologies. In chapter 5, we provide guidance on auditing the execution of the state budget at the end of the fiscal year or the end-year accounts. These audits usually have a financial and compliance focus, but also some supreme audit institutions have started to include a performance perspective. And in chapter 6, we examine budget credibility risks and how to assess those risks at the program and entity level. And finally, in chapter 7, we look at an important piece in this equation, who is the monitoring and follow-up to the audit recommendations related to budget credibility, which is a critical element to be able to strengthen credibility at the national level. Supreme audit institutions may prioritize these audits related to budget credibility in different ways. They could focus, of course, on auditing budget credibility as the main subject of an audit, but also they could integrate or incorporate a budget credibility perspective through specific audit objectives or audit questions within other related budget audits. And of course, we provide or try to provide examples from regarding these two different perspectives. We have examples of how supreme audit institutions like Jamaica have been combining different types of audits. We have recent work from the Supreme Audit Institution of Peru, showing the impact of significant budget deviations on procurement processes and on the delivery of policy objectives. I think one issue that we have discussed extensively also is the connection between budget execution and deviations during budget execution and the performance of public services and the delivery of goods and services. And some supreme audit institutions, for example, published an annual report on public policies, which could provide an entry point to strengthen this link between budget execution and performance and service delivery. However, the experience of some supreme audit institutions show that this kind of work not always inform discussions around the budget in the legislature. So we think that it's also critical to strengthen this collaboration with other stakeholders, like Congress and civil society and experts. And before passing the floor to my colleagues here, I would like to thank, on behalf of UNDESA, the 8 Supreme Audit Institutions, the group of auditors that have been developing the content for this handbook. Some of them are here today with us. We have really been learning a lot from them, and it's been a pleasure really to work with them. I think that today's discussions and also the discussions we may have during the next days and also in other related side events will inform the finalization of the handbook, and we really look forward to continuing to support Supreme Audit Institutions in this work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Arantxa, for the overview of the Budget Credibility Handbook, and many thanks again to all participating. We now would like to hear from you, the audience. We invite you to go to menti.com. This is a tool where you can use it on your phones, you can use it on whichever device you're using. Please go to menti.com and type in the code 1887-9936. And we'd love to hear from you. What comes to mind when you think of budget credibility? So what comes to mind when you think of budget credibility? So this is a collective effort. We'd love to hear from you, your thoughts. So we're at www.menti.com. And the code is 1887-9936. And what comes to mind when you think of budget credibility? Capacity to deliver, how to define, poor budget planning, poor funding and a budget, capacity to deliver, indicator of PFM problems. Great. No, thank you for all who are sharing. Please feel free to continue using menti.com and sharing what comes to mind when you think of budget credibility. How to stick to the plan. Deviation of budgets. Citizen consultation. Budget being inclusive. Scrutiny is relevant. The role of SAIs. It should meet the needs. Excellent. So these are great concepts, great ideas coming from our audience. Thank you so much for participating. Please feel free to continue sharing your thoughts about what comes to mind. We'll now pass over to Mr. Nimias Alberto Souza, Federal Auditor at the SAI of Brazil. Many thanks, of course, to TCU, who is hosting the INTOSAI this year, and we're delighted to learn from you about recurrent audits. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Claire and Arantxa, for these initial words. I would like our colleagues to prepare our presentation here, yeah. So I'd like to start my presentation about the UN IBP Joint Handbook on Budget Credibility, which has involved the cooperation and the participation of a group of specialists from a number of SAIs. And we have taken part in this group as well. And in our case, we have dealt with the issue of recurring audits of the budget. So we have acted in this project in the preparation and development of the chapter specifically related to the issue of recurring audits and how they relate to the general issue of budget credibility with a view to the practical approach of SAI auditor work. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a first slide about the key aspects related to these recurring audits of the budget. The picture there is the presentation of the head of the SAI of Japan to the Prime Minister of Japan of the annual report on the state of accounts of the government of Japan. So we have the issue of recurring audits of the budget. These are audits that are almost universal in the group of SAIs globally. So this is a type of work that SAIs usually conduct. They provide an overview of the state's budget. So it's an analysis by SAIs of the state of the accounts of the nation. And they represent a highlight in SAI work activities. So they are not an unusual work or a common regular work. Rather, they represent an important moment in an SAI work schedule, and this is brought to light in our work here as well. And as I mentioned, most SAIs already conduct recurring audits, even if they are not prescribed as such. So we have different mandates and different institutional settings. So a big part of our work was to define recurring audits and to make it clear the subject which we are referring to, and let SAIs know to see if they have a reflection of their work in this concept. So next slide, please. The next slide will also deal with this topic of delimiting exactly what we are talking about here, what's the object of our analysis. So our first task initially was to define recurring audits of the budget. Recurring audits are comprehensive audits of the national budget that take place on a recurring basis. So every year or every semester or during other periods of time along the year, but always on a recurrent basis. So this has a few special characteristics that relate to the issue of repeatedness, of recurring nature of this work. And we'll also mention this later, a bit later in the presentation. However, we found it important that, as I mentioned, almost every SAI already conducts this type of work, but we found it interesting to define this and to let people know what we are talking about. So due to the diversity of mandates. So for instance, recurring audits of the budget may be referred to as an audit of the government's accounts, or an audit of end-year financial statements, or an audit of the expenditures and revenues of the state, audit of budget execution, etc. These types of works that I have just mentioned, they have one thing in common. They are comprehensive works related to the national budget, and they occur regularly with a repeated basis instead of a one-off type of work. So, and all of these works that I have just mentioned, they are types according to the SAIs and the each nation's legal framework, types of recurring audits. And this is a reference to what recurring audits are. And in delimiting this, we also refer to what they are not. They are not the SAI's general institutional report or a general collection of audit results. So there must be a special analysis, a specific analysis of the budget in the work to configure a recurring audit of the budget instead of a general collection of audit results. So once we delimit the scope of the subject and talk about what these recurring audits are, we should think about why do SAIs conduct this work after all? This picture relates to the recurring audit conducted by the SAI of Ghana, the picture there in the slide. And why do SAIs do this? First of all, these recurring audits of the comprehensive works related to the state's budget, they provide a critical overview of on the collection and allocation of public funds. So this is a major contribution by SAIs to budget credibility specifically, and in general to accountability of public managers. So we provide an overview, but rather than just a description, we aggregate value, we have value added in terms of a critical perspective. We also allow stakeholders, such as the Congress, citizens, donors, and other stakeholders, taxpayers, they're able to track the budgetary management over time. And this relates to the recurring nature of this work. So since we conduct this type of work repeatedly, we are able to track differences timely and to provide for timely recommendations that diminish or minimize possible damages to budget credibility. So we are able really to provide value in our recommendations early on as problems begin to appear, we track them and we are able to provide for corrections. We also foster improvements in public financial management and budget credibility in general, usually through these recommendations. And this is also an important point, as I mentioned in my first slide, this increases the SAI's public profile. We are bringing value and benefits to society. So what we have found looking at the experience of different SAIs all over the world with differing mandates in institutional settings, very often this is one of the major works an SAI conducts during its yearly audit program. So really this is a high point in the SAI's work. This generates a lot of attention from media figures, from society, from the legislative branch as well. So we would like to highlight the importance of recurring audits in providing for the value and benefits of SAIs to society. Next one. Thank you. So here, once we delimit the subject and explain its relevance, another major topic in our chapter was dealing with the diverse SAI mandates. This is also a very important issue because recurring audits may employ audit procedures related to financial auditing, which is the most common type of work, but we also have performance audit procedures and compliance auditing procedures or a combination thereof, which is also very common. So we have mentioned here at the Mentimeter survey, people refer to issues related to program delivery, regularity of accounts, and budget deviations. These are very diverse issues, very diverse problems. And to be able to tackle this array of problems, we argue that we should strive to provide a combination of works rather than focusing on a specific type of work. And recurring audit work also differs according to the SAI's institutional mandate and setting. So we have, in the chapter, we go in depth over this subject as pertains to the work executed by courts of audit. How this type of work differs from general or from regular recurring audits conducted by other models of SAI institutions such as Auditor General, SAIs, and boards of audit. So this we have developed the handbook chapter on budget credibility related to recurring audits, in which we review the nature, characteristics, and expected benefits of this type of work. We discuss the differences between yearly audits and other recurring audits, rather than taking place once during a year, which is a more common approach. We also have SAIs conducting recurring audits every 2, 3, or 6 months. And of course, these more frequent audits have a different nature. They tend to be more specific, more focused. We also discuss that. We try to delve on whether SAIs should or should not, or when they should attempt this type of approach as well. And finally, we approach key issues in audit preparation, planning, execution, and follow-up. So I think this relates to the nature of the handbook as a practical work. So we would not like to provide just a theoretical or an explanatory overview, but rather we also strive to provide day-to-day work advice for auditors and try to be very practical as well. So which were our general goals in writing the chapter on budget credibility related to recurring audits? We attempted to persuade SAIs that do not carry out this gender of work, that we would like to persuade them to show the value that this work entails. We would like to also orient SAIs that already, which is the most common, most often the situation most common, we have verified that most SAIs already conduct this type of work. Maybe they would like to rethink it or to think or to perfect the work they do. And we attempt to provide some orientation on that basis for SAIs to perfect or to advance the recurring audits they already set into practice. Furthermore, we'd like to inform other stakeholders of the features and benefits provided by recurring audits. So this speaks also to the attempt to define the work and to show its general characteristics and features as well. which we believe provides value not just for SAI practitioners, but also to other stakeholders in the general public. Finally, I'd like to express my gratitude to Arantxa, Claire, and all the staff at UNDESA and the IBP for the organization and coordination of this initiative, and also to our partner SAIs and consultants with which we have worked during this time, with whom we have been glad to collaborate, and we feel have developed an excellent document along the past few months. Thank you very much.
Great, many thanks, Emias, and many thanks to all who are contributing today. Thank you for the questions that are coming in. Please do keep sharing your questions and comments and experiences. We'll now go from Brazil and recurrent audits over to Indonesia, where we'll be learning about the experience of auditing the public financial management system. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to thank to the IBP, the UNDESA, and also to the fantastic INTOSAI 2022 for this great opportunity for me to be able to present the development of this handbook, especially for the chapter 4, that which we'll be discussing about the auditing the performance of the PFM system. Maybe for your information, in developing this chapter, SAI Indonesia is in collaboration with my colleague from SAI Zambia. Okay, next. And maybe this one is come across to our mind that why auditing the PFM system matters when we're discussing the budget credibility. It is important to understand that each government will have different cycle of PFM system based on their constitutions, rules, regulations, and many actors will engage in this PFM cycle to ensure that it operates effectively and transparently. And to give you illustration on what PFM system looks like, what common cycle involved in it, we pick one model from Andrews et al. 2014, in which, based on their model, a PFM system is usually consisting of budget formulations in the top of the cycle, and budget approval, budget execution, and also budget evaluations. Why PFM system matter? PFM system will have impacts on all aspects of the resource mobilization and expenditure management, so that the analysis of budget credibility through external audits should consider different dimensions, including those related to the performance of the PFM system more broadly, not merely on the deviations from the approved budget. And we believe that auditing the performance of the PFM system will have a significant impact on the government and the society in regard to budget credibility, since the PFM system is the tool that will ensure that the budget will serve its purpose. So public sector auditing, as championed by SAIs, is an important factor in making difference in the lives of citizens. Next, please. In this chapter, we are trying to operationalize the concept of the auditing the performance of the PFM system. We will then also share some experiences from respective SAIs in conducting auditing the PFM system in the last 10 years. We hope that SAIs around the world could gain insight and perspective on how to conduct this kind of audit and what result of the audit will be, especially the finding that they might find, the constructive recommendation they might deliver to the government, and impacts they might expect by doing this audit. Auditing the performance of the PFM system, okay, thank you. Auditing the performance of the PFM system in your country could be started by selecting a relevant topic. We are aware that despite the mandate for each SAI, I think it would be beneficial for a SAI to consider the interests and priorities of the stakeholders. As may we aware also that a PFM system is a wide picture that sometimes it could be challenging for us to auditing all of the components is in only one audit assignment. That's why, based on our experience, SAI Indonesia's experience, we conducted a series of performance audit during some consecutive years to get the bigger picture of the PFM system. I can give you an example. For example, in the first year, we audited the budgeting system, and the following year, we audited the cash management system, as well as the IT system. And the next year, we audited the quality expenditure, and finally, we audited the public debt management. By conducting this kind of series of performance audit, we believe that we can get more understanding on how the PFM system works and could give some constructive recommendation to the government. And for each of the audit, when we designing the audit, we can utilize an approach that we call it as RIAS, which consists of risks. We considering the risks of the area, the impact of the area that we will audit, auditability, and the significance. After we designing the audit design matrix, we can use it to assist us to be more focused on risky areas, how to audit procedure will be, along with the expected evidence will be collected. Okay, next. Yeah, in this chapter, we are trying to deliver to you the key messages for in this chapter. The first one, audits of the PFM system are intended to strengthen the PFM system, which is an essential aspect of an effective state. A strong PFM system, we believe that will yield significant impacts on budget credibility for better service delivery, stronger economic growth, and poverty reductions. We are also happy to share with you about the positive impacts of audits of the performance of the PFM system reported by Latvia, Egypt, and also Ireland. The second key message is INTOSAI can audit the performance of the PFM system through various types of audit, depending on its mandate, capacity, and also on the experience. In this chapter, we share the experience from SAI Indonesia, which conducts PFM system with a performance audit approach, and also experience from SAI Zambia uses a well-established assessment framework in combination with its annual financial audit. My colleague from SAI Zambia will deliver later. And for key message 3, we believe that besides the accuracy and precision of revenue and expenditure target, measuring budget performance need to include broader indicators related to the achievement of budget outputs and outcomes. Next key message is, given the challenges involved in auditing the performance of the PFM system, it is essential also for an SAI to utilize the big data analytics and cooperate with other SAIs. We have the experience using this big data analytics when conducting the performance audit regarding the PFM system. And we found it very valuable for us, and we can suggest maybe it can be valuable also for you. Last but not least, the last key message is, given the complexity of the PFM system, it may be costly and takes a longer time to audit the whole PFM system in one audit. So SAIs can identify and select components of the system to be audited. I think the next I will pass to my colleague from SAI Zambia. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Tavan. We'll pass now to Mr. Nama Pandey, who's Principal Auditor of SAI Zambia, for your experience. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. My name is Ngawam Pandey from SAI Zambia. Just building upon the introduction on the audit of the PFM that has been introduced by my colleague from SAI Indonesia. Yes, the PFA, in light of budget credibility, is actually a very important audit. For SAI Zambia, we did conduct the first PFM audit for the financial year ended 1st December 2020. And the objective of this audit, looking at its importance, was to gather, assess, and report on the effectiveness and efficiency of the PFM system at the core PFM institutions of the Ministry of Finance, which is key for budget formulation, and then Parliament, which is key for budget approval, then the Revenue Authority, which is key for mobilizing government revenue. And then we also looked at some key PFM institutions as well, like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, and Ministry of Agriculture, whose selection was based on the proportion of their funding to the budget. Because this is very key. These are key ministries for service delivery and sustainable development. The next slide. Yes, the main processes of the system, from our experience, we looked at all the processes of the budget cycle. The audit was conducted using the PFM version 2 reporting framework 2, which is a very comprehensive Excel-based tool with questions that are specific for the core PFM institutions and then the other institutions. These questions are very key in that they look at the entire budget cycle, which is equally very key for budget credibility. For example, the micro policy, fiscal policy, and strategic budgeting questions are directed at the Ministry of Finance and the Revenue Authority. Then all these other PFM institutions, questions are directed at the budget preparation, budget approval, financial management, and service delivery. And then the last process that we looked at was accounting, reporting, and oversight, which is actually very key at the end of the process. From the interaction of the two, and from the interaction of the two, it's actually very key in interaction with the client, and then helping the client understand issues of budget credibility. So the key observations from our interaction was, if you look at the PFM process, systems have to interlink for the budget to actually, for processes to speak to each other. So there is an issue of alignment of strategic plans to the National Development Plan, because budgeting has to start from the National Development Plans, which are basically the like political statements of the government in power, whose vision has to be taken upon by the other related ministries who have to budget in line with the vision of the country. I mean, with the vision of the government in power. Then the other issue in terms of our experience is that of budgets not being fully funded. Budgets not being fully funded despite being approved by the Ministry of Finance. So the questions are, what is the problem? Where is the linkage? Where is the problem coming from? So the PFM audit actually looks at the root causes, and the tool enables us to go deeper to the root cause, and at the end of the day, come up with recommendations, which at the end of the day are helping to improve the budgeting system. Because budgeting, as much as they are approved, are not fully funded. So that has got an impact on budget credibility in terms of expenditure. Because what has been approved, what has been released is not tallying with what is actually spent. Then, of course, we have issues of weaknesses in commitment controls, which is actually a key issue under budget credibility. Because if commitment controls are not strong, then that will affect the budget implementation. Then, of course, issues of delays in collection of revenue, and then, of course, deviations, issues of unconstitutional expenditures, misappropriation of funds, and then poor linkages in information systems. So these have an effect on budget credibility. So this is our experience from the various audits that have been done, including the PFM, whose, of course, it is not yet concluded, but these are major things that are being observed from the audits. Okay, thanks a lot for your attention, and I can hand over to my colleague.
Great, thank you, Mr. Fernandez. That's great. No, thank you so much for the comprehensive experience that you have in Zambia of auditing budget credibility related issues. We'll now turn to Morocco, Mr. Mohsin Hanoun, who's magistrate at the SAI of Morocco, and we'll hear about the whole of government risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. My name is Mohsin Hanoun. I'm from Court of Accounts of Kingdom of Morocco. First of all, I would like to thank Claire and Aransha and IBP and UNDESA for giving us this opportunity to work together and share knowledges and experiences. For me, before presenting budget credibility risks across budget cycle, I would like to try to answer a simple question. Why auditing budget credibility is matter? Or in other words, why SAIs should audit budget credibility? I think that my colleague Aransha have already provided some answers when she talked about SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, especially number 6 and its indicator number 16.6.1, and when she talked about the big budget deviation across countries. For me, I would like just to add one argument. It is INTOSAI principle number 12, value and benefits of supreme audit institution making a difference to the life of citizens. This principle sets up that SAIs contribute to effective, accountable, and inclusive governance by delivering value and benefits for all through, yes, of course, among others, strengthening the accountability, transparency, and integrity of government and public sector and entities. The same principles set up that SAIs strengthen accountability, transparency, and integrity by independently auditing public sector operation and reporting on their findings. This enables those charged with the public sector governance to discharge their responsibilities in responding to audit findings and recommendation and taking appropriate corrective action, and thus complete the cycle of accountability. I think that there is a big opportunity for SAIs to contribute to add value and benefit for all through their audit and undertake audit to contribute to reduce budget deviation and therefore enhance budget credibility. And to assess budget credibility risk, the SAIs have can flow two ways. First one, they can focus on budget credibility risk at wall of the government level, work level, at each of the stage of the budget cycle, and assess budget credibility risk at the program and the entity level. Every stage of the budget cycle related to the whole of government contains risk which can compromise the credibility of the budget. So auditors should identify those risks, analyze and use them to plan and conduct audit through different approaches: compliance, financial or performance audit, or combination thereof. Next slide, please. Next. And in our project, we have tried to highlight some main risk at each stage of budget cycle. For the risks at the budget formulation stage, we have highlighted two main risks. First one, the unrealistic revenue and expenditure projection. For budget to be meaningful, estimates of revenue and expenditure contained in those budgets must be realistic and reflective of existing economic circumstances. And some experts consider that more credible revenue forecasts are associated with the less expenditure deviations, which implies that there is a sort of direct correlation between the accuracy of the revenue expenditure forecasts and the credibility of the budget. The unreliable estimates of revenue and expenditure is therefore a catalyst of misallocation of resources across a different program. Second risks in this stage, we have a misalignment of budget to long-term planning and frameworks and SDGs. We all agree that annual budgets are supposed to be a tool through which governments implement long-term and medium-term plans and strategic priorities. Those frameworks highlight interventions, roadmap, and timelines for achievement of set targets by the executive. Annual budget should therefore be well aligned to those national development frameworks and should incorporate SDG. For the auditor, assessing the extent of alignment of the annual budgets to the development plans and SDGs therefore became an important aspect to credibility assessment and an opportunity for corrective actions. For risks at the budget approval stage, we have highlighted one main risk. It's delayed approval of the budget by the legislature. In most of national regulation, strict timelines have been defined within which the executive must present the budget to Parliament for scrutiny and approval. However, despite having those timelines by law, there are many cases where those timelines are never complied with. This significantly reduces the time to scrutinize and analyze the budget and its fiscal objective before approval, which increases the risk of deviation during the execution. For example, the 2020 financial audit report for the budget execution in the Bosnia and Herzegovina highlighted that despite the existence of deadlines to pass the budget laws in order to facilitate budget implementation, the Budget Act was only passed in July 2020. Financial of institutions and servicing of international obligation was done for most of the year based on temporary decisions of the Council of Ministers. This case highlights a major credibility risk from having the budget implemented based on temporary decision by the Council. At the risks at the budget, for risks at the budget execution stage, we have highlighted the two main risks. First one, the implementation of inappropriate and off-budget activities. One of the risks at the execution stage is the implementation of activities that have neither been scrutinized nor approved by Parliament. Failure to disclose funds to legislature implies that the budget that is finally approved is understated by the amount of budget financial. Of budget financing and the implementation of activities that are not part of the approved budget represent significant credibility risks. Second main risk at the budget execution stage, we have the government's ability to cope with shocks. Unexpected events and external factors can affect budget credibility. Auditors should examine the capacity of government and the flexibility of the budget to absorb external shocks. The risk at the budget reporting stage and accountability. The ineffective reporting and accountability systems affect budget credibility. Conversely, strong accountability and reporting systems strengthen budget credibility since they act as controls over how the executives can spend resources and if those resources are put to correct use. When governments have a strong system of accounting for resources and reporting to citizens, the risk of diverting from the approved budgets is significantly reduced. Last stage, we have external risk at the external oversight and evaluation stage. The main risks in this stage are related to the capacity of parliament, SAIs, and other oversight bodies to provide external audits and evaluation of budget execution. Thank you. I give the floor to Clara. Claire. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Important risks being identified at each stage of the budget process, and we've been hearing about different kinds of audits that we can be using as well, so thank you so much. We're now going to be looking a bit more at the program level and the sector level, so I'll pass over to Coralie de la Cruz.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our colleagues here in Rio and those joining via Zoom. I'm Cora from SAI of Philippines, and I will be presenting and discussing briefly Chapter 6, which relates to assessing budget credibility risks at program and entity levels. Next slide, please. In general, SAIs audit the utilization of state budget at the program or entity level in relation to the common themes of budget accountability and compliance with budget laws, rules, and regulations of their country. In the survey that supported the development of this handbook, and as confirmed by available works of literature about external audits and budget credibility, we found that auditors and SAIs do not articulate budget deviations in terms of budget credibility in their audit reports. Although one of the good practices in articulating budget credibility in their reports was when the SAI of Ghana directly referred to budget credibility in some of its public accounts audits. The audit of fiscal year 2018, for example, highlighted that budget credibility requires the government to be accurate and consistent in meeting its revenue and expenditures estimates. Despite this limited exposure of budget credibility in SAI's work, introducing it in the audit at the program and entity level would not necessarily be a new dimension for SAIs and auditors, as they have already covered some aspects of this theme one way or another. In fact, the handbook presents experiences from various SAIs that may be suited for audits that can be entry points to integrate budget credibility at the program or entity level. Some of these SAIs experiences and examples include the following. In one case, the untimely accounting for all expenditures of the Federal Student Loan Program had unduly postponed bookkeeping and distorted the budget. The program also underestimated liabilities incurred by the government to private universities. Thus, the court issued an order for the executive branch to fully account for student loan expenditures in future budget legislation. Another example was the lack of reliable and valid data on eligible beneficiaries, and the information systems has not been fully optimized to support the planning, budgeting, and execution of government assistance programs. As a result, the target and the intended purpose of the programs would not be fully achieved, and there is an inefficient use and underspending of government budget. Recurrent deficiencies were also found in the budgeting of both education and health programs in one example. Structural problems in the budget forecasting were observed, which needed to be more realistic and represent a risk in budget credibility. Underspending is mainly an attempt to control overall expenditures in basic and secondary education. Next slide, please. We see major considerations in how budget credibility in program entity level audits can be properly integrated, starting with recognizing the SAI's institutional, organizational, and professional capacities. This includes reviewing and recognizing the SAI's legal and professional capacities, the extent of their mandate, ways to perform strategic planning, collective professional capacities, and expertise in auditing budget at the program or entity level, among others. These considerations would guide SAIs to decide which approach of budget credibility assessment they would undertake. Integrating these considerations enabled us to produce a chapter that would provide reference to auditors on the necessary audit activities in the assessment of budget credibility at the program or entity level. Aside from the state budget, the chapter also covered discussions of other funding sources that are outside the regular budget when looking at the credibility of the planning, utilization, and reporting of programs that are supported by off-budgetary financing and other funding sources such as income generation of local or subnational governments and government corporations. The discussions in the identification and assessment of risks, as well as the determination of appropriate responses, are shared in general sense that provides flexibility for the intended contexts. The chapter also anticipated the plethora of credibility risks and risk factors that are encountered by entities in their execution of the budget per country. Common risk factors are presented in the draft chapter to provide auditors with the kind of risks to be identified in assessing and addressing the budget credibility at the program or entity level. Based on the 2021 report published by the International Budget Partnership about upholding commitments, how Supreme Audit Institutions can strengthen budget credibility through external audits, common budgetary execution issues are usually regarding the following. First, management capacities and procedures, documentation of expenditures, estimation of costs and spending, timing of spending, and generation, capture, and management of performance information. The focus on credibility risk assessment shows SAIs to map out and navigate budget credibility in their audit work papers. This ensures that the credibility lens is consistently being checked from audit planning to audit execution and reporting. This consistency will provide useful budget performance information to stakeholders and key actors in government as to how an audited entity plan and spend its budget. Through audit recommendations, planning and utilization of budget, as well as the delivery of programs and projects of the government can be improved. We would also just like to highlight some of the key messages relevant to this chapter. First one is that we believe that credibility approaches in audits are advocated to be universal and flexible. Auditors can use practical guidance and established SAI knowledge to assess risks to budget credibility at the program entity level for transactions that are either funded within or outside the regular budget process. SAIs and auditors should consider important and relevant factors such as the internal arrangement of the SAIs audits, its authority, and the extent of risk assessments in order to integrate a budget credibility perspective into their audit work. Assessments of budget credibility risks do not follow a one-size-fits-all approach. And ultimately, budget credibility-related audit findings in program or entity levels or audits receive interest and attention from key sectoral actors and the general public as taxpayers. These audit findings translate into messages of accountability and transparency that are conveyed to stakeholders, thereby increasing the value and benefits of SAIs. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Cora. Very comprehensive and great important messages there of budget credibility. We'll come back to some of those as well. But I'd like to now turn to Aníbal Colhuber of SAI Argentina to discuss monitoring and follow-up. Please.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. For me, it's very important to be here as part of this team. It's a distinguished team. Thank you very much, UNDESA. Thank you very much, IBP staff, Arantxa, David, Claire, Andy, and Alex. Thank you very much for this opportunity. As my colleague from Morocco was mentioned, the budget is a common issue and aspect for all the governments. And of course, it takes an important impact of the quality of life of people. So, as we know, we don't finish our work with the report. It's very important the other part of how we do the monitoring and the follow-up and the findings and recommendations. In this work, we are suggesting, based on this research, some specific critical aspects to mention. One of them is, why not try to improve the budget credibility to build a more robust and actionable recommendations to be effective. So for us, for this research, is a very important issue. In this, for our investigation, we suggest to work in the area of the criteria to define which will be the priorities of the findings and recommendations to implement, and link to this the materiality of these recommendations. This is what we suggest, and we know that the SAIs and ESAIs suggest good practices to implement this kind of critical message. The other thing we talk about is we know that the implementation of the recommendation is in general low. And it's low based on different sources. Like, for example, a report created by INTOSAI through IDI, stock level of investigation, that says that few findings and recommendations are really implemented when the SAIs prepare the report. And it is based too in another questionnaire that we, as part of the team, circulated for the members of the INTOSAI group. But additional to this, to create a good way for implementation, we find that the systematization of the finding is very critical and crucial. Why we say that? We have an example of the case of Georgia. Georgia in 2015 and 17, sorry, they have a level of 43% of the implementation of the recommendations. But when they systematize the system, the way of understanding of and procedure with the recommendation, the high level of implementation was almost 60% of the recommendation. So we find a very interesting experience that we are suggesting in this work. Another critical message from our report is to achieve the expected impact of the audit findings. And for that, we find some good practices from some countries that get involved with the civil society organization and other stakeholders like the parliament, for example. In these cases, the influence of the stakeholders is very important to get the implementation of the recommendation. As an example, we can mention the case of Argentina, the case of Peru, Sierra Leone, and I invite you to have the experience, the innovative experience created by IBP and UNDESA, try to see what's happening around the world with these experiences. So to create a strategy and an implementation plan is very important. In case of Argentina, just to mention that it was very important the case of the Chagas. Chagas is an important disease for our country. Unfortunately, in the areas of poor people, mainly. But the important thing of this practice is the way that the civil society organizations have been involved in this kind of activities. And we think we highlight this experience because after the participation of one of these civil society organization, the name is ASIG, we fortunately get a more important application of the budget, and we got better results of the finding of the work. Finally, I think this is part of our work, no? To not just to prepare the report, if not to see what happened with our reports. Finally, as part of this work and this handbook, we think that auditors should work in the way by community the findings. The use of a simple language to be understandable, to be clear, we believe that creates an environment for a better implementation of the recommendation of the report. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Aníbal. You've highlighted again the cross-cutting issues of stakeholder engagement, effective communication, understanding and measuring our impact, and monitoring our audit recommendations. So thank you so much. We want to, this effort, we're developing a handbook together. Obviously, we don't want it to just sit on a shelf. We want it to be used and useful. And for that, we'd love to hear, Cora, some thoughts that you might have on how we might advance the use of this handbook in the INTOSAI community, if you're open to sharing.
Okay, I would just like to share our experience with the working group on public debt on how we are able to advance the utilization and the launch of some of our products, which can be similarly we can also adapt with this handbook. Of course, we have high hopes that looking at the contents of this handbook is it would be really be useful for the SAIs. But also it is important that this handbook would have some sort of, to undergo some sort of a quality assurance or a due process. Like, because if it will be used by Supreme Audit Institutions, we, in the INTOSAI, we have this due process. Like, for example, when we develop products within the INTOSAI framework of professional pronouncements, we undergo certain levels of due process. And this is the one that I would like to focus on this. The first one is we make sure that every product undergoes a public exposure stage. The public exposure stage does not necessarily mean that you only post it for comments. Sometimes you do it in the form of focus group discussions, for example. So you have a focus group, like for example, when we do the handbook on guidance on audit of public debt, we make sure that organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, and those that are really the key actors in these subjects are given this a copy, and we requested them to provide their comments. And because other organizations, other than the auditors, may have a different perspective. And since most of the standards and criteria that we will be using came from those institutions and organizations, it is most fitting that we also get their perspective to be inputted in this handbook. And of course, a pilot audit is also a good venue, some sort of, to ensure that there is also a quality assurance, because when we do pilot audits, it's something like to test the applicability and the relevance of the guidance material. So it would be good also that if we do some pilot audits, then we get feedback on what went well based on the handbook and what needs to be improved. Now, to realize this one, I mean, there has to be a group that should be doing this kind of work. So we were thinking also that in the case of this handbook, we can have some mechanisms, like, for example, we can partner with some of the working groups within the INTOSAI KSC. I am also thinking of partnering it with a working group on public debt, but there is also a proposal to create another working group. I don't know, but regardless of what would be the decision, there has to be somebody, a group that would take care of this, so that we can ensure that there is quality and there is assurance of continuity and sustainability of the project. And it is also advantageous to have it in a working group, because you see, the maintenance of this handbook is also important. Like, for example, in the working group on public debt, when we develop a handbook or a guidance material, there is a statement there that in every 3 years you have to revisit the handbook, because you need to update, because we say that even good practices, even best practices change as time pass by. So we have to update that. We have to ensure and preserve the usefulness and relevance of the material of the handbook, so that it can still be useful for auditors. And also, it's important that we collaborate also with regional organizations. Like, for example, from us here, the original core drafting team, we are members of different regional organizations. Me and Topan are members of the INTOSAI, they're members of the AFROSAI, and members of the ARABOSAI. We can leverage, we can use that to our advantage by, introducing it to them. SAI Philippines is a member of the governing board of the INTOSAI. We can also use that as an influence. And in the ASEAN SAI, this is composed of 8 member SAIs from the ASEAN region. We already started extending this initiative by including this in the ASEAN SAI Knowledge Sharing Committee work plan for 2024 to 2025, to include the topic on budget credibility as one of the important topics for discussion. So maybe at our level, we can also do it by within our own SAIs. We can already launch some sort of a buy-in to introduce it to our colleagues in the SAI level, so that we can get the support. And then after that, we can do also some pilot audits or some test audits using the handbook at the level of the SAIs. So actually, there are a number of ways by which we can do it, but the more important thing is the quality assurance for the handbook and somebody who will take charge of initiating or extending support to and collaboration with the INTOSAI community. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cora. No, these are fantastic ideas. Quality assurance, absolutely. Many of you have been asking, when is this available? What are the next steps? We will be getting into the peer review process and welcome more of a community of practice to take up the handbook and work with us. Great ideas around institutionalizing, engaging with different stakeholders and regional bodies, and of course piloting as well. So on that note, we want to hear from you again. We invite you to go back to menti.com, and we'd love to hear from you in terms of what areas of budget credibility interest you most. So we've heard today about recurrent audits, the auditing of the performance of the entire PFM system, the risks to the whole of government and entity level, how we monitor and follow up. We'd love to hear from you, menti.com. What areas of budget credibility interest you most? I'll give 5 more seconds. Great. No, thank you. It's helpful to see where the interest is lying. We'll be sure to follow up. Of course, we'll continue to provide helpful guidance on all areas. And then one last question for you. What would you find most helpful in supporting SAIs in promoting budget credibility? So it's our last poll. So a step-by-step approach to address credibility more systematically in audit reports. Tools and measures that can be used to improve audits related to credibility. Examples of strong audit recommendations to address credibility problems. Learning with those who have conducted audits or assessments related to credibility. And piloting in your country or our country once the handbook is available. Final thoughts. Great. No, thanks again. And please do continue to share your feedback with us. We see that we have more tools and measures to share. We'll be sure to do that. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues at UNDESA for co-organizing this event together, and of course all of our distinguished speakers, all of the contributors to the handbook, all of the members of the reference group and others who are truly building a community interested in budget credibility and implementing audits related to budget credibility. And we are here today at INTOSAI. We'll be here this week. We have a booth, UNDESA and IBP. We invite you to join us so you have a special virtual reality experience of why budget credibility matters in the lives of people. Please do join us. We invite you to continue to stay in touch. We will be sharing the materials, the presentations, and the recording. And of course, we'll be continuing to build on the research and engagement. Thank you very much again to everyone, and wishing you a great day, evening, and morning. Thank you so much.